Hey guys, welcome back, or if you're new, then welcome to another episode about my Pokemon Emerald ROM hack project, Pokemon Edited Emerald. As explained in the first episode, my aims with this project are to rebalance the Pokemon seen throughout the Hoenn region without altering the original experience too much, and as such modern features such as the physical special split and the fairy type have not been implemented. Last episode, we covered the changes to the starter Pokemon now that they've been changed to the Kanto Trio. If you want to learn more about the project and the new starters, I heavily suggest watching the first episode if you haven't already. Now, let's get on with this episode's focus on the first 4 routes of Hoenn. One thing to note is that I've not gone and made any changes to the maps, aside from a very few visual changes. I experimented with a couple of early routes, such as the Puddle, and there's also a rock on Route 101 as well. There's a few more flowers on Route 103, but overall I've not really changed the appearance of these routes that much. I've also not really changed the Pokemon that appear on these routes, as I find the early game variety to be quite good enough already. With that said, I'll start with Pokemon that you can find in Hoenn's beginning route. First up is Zigzagoon. This normal type Pokemon is meant to be the standard Route 1 rodent adjacent Pokemon, similar to the likes of Rattata and Sentret before it. Zigzagoon is typically pathetically weak, being a pure normal type with low stats and mediocre moves. While I have made changes to the line, they're not so drastic as to make Zigzagoon powerful, rather than it's now just about decent. I would go as far to say that Linoone is actually quite usable during the mid-game too. Starting with its stats, Zigzagoons remain unchanged, and my reasoning for this was that buffing a Pokemon this common and appearing this early could surprise players too much, especially as they won't have many resources. The changes come later, when it evolves into Linoone, who got a 20-point buff to its attack and special attack stats. So Linoone now has base 90 attack and base 100 speed stats, making it quite strong for the level that you can get it at. However, its mediocre bulk will show its weakness in due time. Zigzagoon's learn set has also changed quite a bit. It now learns Quick Attack instead of Tail Whip at level 5, Bite instead of Sand Attack at level 13, and Swift instead of Odor Sleuth at level 17. So it now learns quite an array of attacking moves instead of quite useless status moves. After evolving, it will learn the move Return, which rewards players that have raised their Zigzagoon from low levels. It will then go on to learn Dig, Slash, Rest, Sleep Talk, Belly Drum, Double Edge, and finally Extreme Speed at level 45. Hopefully this stat buff and these new moves will help Linoone to become a more appreciable Pokemon rather than just being completely lackluster. Another one of the disappointments found on Route 101 is Poochyena. It shares many of the same issues as Zigzagoon and as such got very similar treatment. Mightyena's stats have been increased by 10 in defense and 20 in special attack. I thought a little more physical bulk would pair well with its Intimidate ability, and an increase in special attack means its Dark-type stab moves will actually deal some damage. As you'll see later, other Dark-type Pokemon will also receive a similar special attack increase. And as for moves, Poochyena learns Bite noticeably earlier at level 5, so it can start dishing out stab damage faster. It also gets Mud Slap and Poison Fang as coverage options, and after evolving into Mightyena, it will go on to learn Headbutt, Crunch, Swagger, Thief, Taunt, Torment, and Body Slam. While this is nothing amazing, it does help Mightyena out a bit by learning Crunch noticeably earlier too, and some Dark-type support moves. Overall, these buffs are not that significant, but will be nice for players wishing to use this Pokemon. Next up is a rather complicated case. It's the early Bug-type Pokemon, Wurmple. Right off the bat, I've gotten rid of String Shot, a rather unexciting move, especially in Generation 3. Wurmple now learns Tackle, Poison Sting, Leech Life as its early moves. Now, I do have to warn you, watch out for those Poison Stings, as I did buff the power to 30 and it will often poison your Pokemon, making Wurmple a bit of a pain to deal with in the early game. Leech Life's base power also got an increase to 35, so it's still an early game bug-type move rather than the approach Generation 7 took. Overall, Wurmple's a bit stronger now and will be easier to train to evolve. As I'm sure you know, Wurmple evolves randomly into either Silcoon or Cascoon, both of which will now have access to Poison Sting and Leech Life in the wild and will learn Harden upon evolution as usual. Where this gets more interesting is when those two evolve into Beautifly and Dustox. We'll take a look at Beautifly first. Its stats have been increased by 10 in attack and 20 in special defense and speed. The extra attack means that Stab, Bug and Flying moves will deal a bit more damage, while the extra speed helps it take out weak opponents in one strike, whilst not taking damage itself. It's still not very impressive, but is now more usable for longer. This is no Pokemon to be bringing to the Elite Four or anything. Beautifly is also the more offensive of the two, which is represented through these stats and its learn set, which is now Gust, Mega Drain, Stun Spore. Those three are learned immediately upon evolving, and then Confusion, Silver Wind, Air Cutter, Morning Sun, Signal Beam, Psychic, and finally Giga Drain. This mix of attacks will hopefully let players discover how strong Beautifly can be in the right situations. Now, moving on to Dustox, it takes a more defensive approach. Its stats have been increased by 10 in attack and 20 in HP and special attack. Its attacking stats are still very mediocre, but enough to do some damage. 80 HP and 90 special defense give Dustox some respectable bulk too. As for its learn set, it now gets Acid, Poison Powder, and Confusion upon evolution, and then we'll go on to learn Protect, Silver Wind, Psybeam, Sludge Bomb, Moonlight, Signal Beam, and Toxic. As these Pokemon are not meant to be used long term, both of their learn sets finish at level 38, so the benefit of using these two is that they'll have decent stats and moves for the early and mid game, but will not be all helpful come about the 6th gym. Going north of Odale, you'll find Route 103. The only new encounter here is Wild Wingull. Pelipper got a buff to its base HP stat by 20, so that it can make more use of its pretty good 100 base defense. Wingull now learns Gust at level 5 to give it some earlier flying stab damage, as well as Bubble Beam at 17 to bridge the gap between Water Gun and Hydro Pump before Surf is obtained. It also learns Pursuit earlier at level 22 for a little bit of coverage. Pelipper also goes on to learn Protect, Stockpile, Spit Up, Twister, Rain Dance, and Hydro Pump. Overall, not many changes were made to Pelipper, but again, buffing a Pokemon that appears so commonly over the whole region could annoy players finding it in the wild over and over again, and so I kept them quite tame. The next route to explore in this episode is Route 102, to the west of Odell Town. This route introduces quite a few new Pokemon, so let's get started. First up is Lotad, a unique grass and water type Pokemon. Usually, Lotad learns very little of both stab moves, especially considering it has to wait until level 43 to even get Mega Drain, as mentioned last episode. This was just unacceptable. The only change I made to Lotad was to have it learn Water Gun at level 7, so now it has a water type move. But Lombre now learns Rain Dance when evolving and then goes on to get Fake Out, Mega Drain, Bubble Beam, Uproar, Tita Dance, Giga Drain, and Hydro Pump. Ludicolo, being a stone evolution, usually doesn't learn moves through leveling up. However, I decided that it should be able to learn the last 3 moves if the player wants to evolve their Lombre before level 42, which they probably do. Next up is Seedot. Instead of Bide, I decided to give it Pound so it can actually fight. Usually Seedot's only damaging move was Explosion. Yeah, it was bad. Seedot also now learns Bullet Seed at level 5, a bit pointless considering the TM for it isn't far away, but that also meant I didn't feel too bad about giving it a strongish move this early, especially considering it didn't get anything else other than Growth and Nature Power. Nuzleaf learns Thief after evolution, and then goes on to learn Mega Drain, Faint Attack, Giga Drain, Torment, Razor Wind, Swagger, and Extra Sensory. Shiftry follows Ludicolo, where it will learn the last 3 of those moves by level up, for the exact same reasons as before. Shiftry also had a slight stat change, with it losing 20 attack, but getting 10 more special attack and speed in exchange. Most of Shiftry's moves in this game are special attacks, so I thought shifting them around like this would make sense. Another bugged Pokemon that desperately needed changes was Surskit. Not only was it unavailable in the wild apart from Swarms in Emerald, it was extremely rare in Ruby and Sapphire, and yet it's not exactly worth catching in any of those games. I made its encounter rate much higher for Edited Emerald, and made some other improvements. It now learns Quick Attack earlier, as well as learning Leech Life at level 7 and Water Pulse at 13. With this, it now has better stab options during the early game, and I also want to point out I did buff Bubble's base power to 40 to match the changes in Generation 6, as 20 was just too weak. Upon evolution, Masquerain will learn Air Cutter and Silver Wind, as well as Haze, Giga Drain, Psybeam, Signal Beam, Mist, and Hydro Pump later on. Masquerain also got a 10-point buff to its attack, special attack, and speed stats to make it better offensively. The last Pokemon on Route 102 is Ralts. The most notable change is it now starts with Confusion instead of having to get it to level 6 for any damaging moves. It also learns Double Team, Teleport, and Calm Mind earlier. Curlier now gets Psybeam when it evolves, as well as Hypnosis a bit later, and Gardevoir learns Dream Eater when evolving, and goes on to get Magical Leaf, Psychic, Future Sight, and Destiny Bond. One thing to note is I moved Psychic to be learned later than usual. Where Curlier typically got it at level 26, Gardevoir now gets it at level 35. I don't think this is unreasonable, as Psybeam should be good enough from level 20 to 30, and most other Psychic Pokemon learn the move Psychic later. Godvar's stats are also unchanged, as it was already quite strong. Route 104 only introduces 2 new Pokemon. One of those is Hoenn's regional bird, Tailo. Now, Tailo was already quite excellent to begin with, especially early on, and so no changes were made until it evolves into Swellow. When it does, Swellow will learn Aerial Ace, Steel Wing soon after, and then Endeavour, Agility, Hyper Voice, Draw Peck, and Sky Attack. While Swellow was good in the early game, it lacked strong stab moves later on. As such, the addition of Hyper Voice and Drill Peck fixes this issue. Swellow also lacks bulk, but I've only given it a 10-point increase in HP so as not to make it too defensive. Overall, very few changes, but changes that will make Swellow more usable in the late game. The other newcomer is Marill, the first non-Hoenn native Pokemon that the player can find. Marill's learn set has changed slightly so that it gets Water Gun, Rollout, and Bubble Beam earlier, while losing Tail Whip, which I doubt many people will care about. Marill evolves quite early into Azumarill, where it goes on to learn Headbutt, Rain Dance, Ice Punch, Body Slam, Double Edge, and Hydro Pump. Azumarill's special attack was also increased by 20 points, so that if you want to use water and ice moves, they won't be as pitiful, but still won't be that strong. Obviously, the appeal of this line is their huge power ability. Doubling their attack stat is just amazing, and so I decided to remove the potential of them having thick fat. As such, including more physical attacks such as Headbutt and Body Slam made sense, so they can make more use of this ability. Jeez, that was a lot of Pokemon to go through. Something I loved about Hoenn was just how many different Pokemon there are to find in these early routes, and they're all new to this generation. Well, most of them anyway, apart from like Marill. Some of them needed a lot of love, and others not so much. What do you think about my attempt at empowering some of these early Pokemon? Are you excited to try out some of these Pokemon now? Let me know in the comments below. Next episode, I'll be going over Petalburg Woods and Route 116. Hope to see you there. Bye bye!